The galaxy had always been a place of wonders and dangers where ancient species ruled the stars with a mix of wisdom and fearsome power, but there was one thing they all agreed on: the Black Armada was a threat unlike any other. It had been centuries since their ships had last moved, and now, without warning, the Black Fleet had awakened from its slumber to bring destruction and chaos. Wherever it went, they had decimated countless civilizations and left nothing but ruins in their wake, and now they were headed toward the heart of the Galactic Coalition. The Galactic Coalition was made up of various alien species, each more advanced than humanity, but none prepared for the unrelenting force that was the Black Armada. At first, the humans were seen as nothing more than a curiosity in this vast interstellar war. Their technology was primitive compared to the advanced civilizations around them, yet their spirit and resilience had caught the attention of those watching from the sidelines. Humanity had been building its military presence across the stars for decades, sending out small fleets to protect their colonies and establish trade routes. But the news of the Black Armada's return hit Earth like a shockwave. They were no longer a bystander in this war. They had no choice but to join the fight. The first mission was simple on the surface: a reconnaissance operation to gather intelligence on an alien world that was known to have been hit by the Armada's first wave. It was a mission of high importance, but the kind of mission the Coalition thought was too insignificant for humanity to handle. It wasn't just about the data they needed to retrieve, it was about proving their worth to the galaxy. Admiral Evelyn Drake was put in charge of the mission, a decorated officer with a history of unconventional strategies. She was known for thinking outside the box in ways that left both allies and enemies guessing. Her ship, the Defiant, was an old Earth cruiser, but she had a crew that was loyal to the core and ready to face any challenge ahead. The task was simple enough: fly to the wreckage of the destroyed colony and gather what remained of the alien ship's data before it fell into the wrong hands. But as they entered the sector, they realized something was wrong. The wreckage wasn't as it seemed. There was no sign of alien life, no remaining resistance. The sensors flickered and strange signals began to appear on the edges of their radar. A trap had been set, but who had set it, and why had they been so careless? As the crew prepared for a full scan, a sudden explosion rocked their ship, and all systems went dark. For a terrifying moment, all communications were lost, and they were left stranded in the dark void of space. Drake's calm voice came through the comms for the crew to hold steady and get back to work. No matter what was happening outside, their mission had just begun. The enemy was near, and they would have to rely on their ingenuity to survive. This was no longer just about gathering intelligence. This was about surviving the first test of many to come. As the crew scrambled to repair the ship and reestablish communications, they realized they weren't alone. Something was lurking in the dark, waiting and watching, waiting for the right moment to strike, and the humans were about to find out just how much they were underestimated. The silence of space was shattered as the first wave of the Black Armada arrived, their ships emerging from the deep expanse of the nebula that had concealed them for centuries. They were vast, and their dark hulls seemed to absorb the light around them like black holes moving through the stars. The ships were ancient, their design beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, but it was the speed and efficiency of their assault that left the galaxy trembling. The first world they struck was one of the Coalition's most defensible, and yet within hours it was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire, and panic began to ripple through the galactic systems. The Armada had been silent for so long. Their presence in the universe was myth, their technology was legendary, but no one had ever thought it would rise again. The suddenness of the attack threw every civilization into disarray. The Galactic Council scrambled to form a plan, but they were woefully unprepared. The Black Armada was a force beyond anything they had ever encountered. In the middle of this chaos, the humans stood ready. Earth's people had been thrust into this war unwillingly, but they had a fire inside them, a desire to fight that the galaxy's older species couldn't understand. Their ships were primitive, their weapons outdated, but they had something the others lacked. They had the will to survive and the determination to face any threat, no matter the odds. Admiral Evelyn Drake knew the stakes better than anyone else. She had seen the reports, the wreckage from the first wave. She understood what the Black Armada was capable of, but she also understood the value of unpredictable tactics and cunning in the face of overwhelming odds. She had led humanity's first steps into this war, and now it was time to prove that Earth's forces could play a key role in stopping the unstoppable. Her orders came down from the Coalition Command, an emergency meeting of all the species to discuss how they would counter the threat. Drake stood at the table alongside alien leaders who had little trust in humanity. Their species had fought against each other for millennia, and now they were expected to fight together against an ancient enemy. Yet there was no choice. The Black Armada's destruction was too vast to ignore. The strategy session was long and tense, voices raised in anger and fear. The Coalition's forces had already suffered significant losses, their fleets shattered and broken. The more established powers in the galaxy looked down on humanity with disdain. Their forces were still young compared to the older civilizations, but it was clear now that humanity's presence could no longer be ignored. Drake spoke up in the meeting, her voice calm but resolute. She had no patience for hesitation or doubt. It was clear to her that the Coalition was going to need humanity's unpredictable strategies to turn the tide. They had to fight not like the others, but differently, in ways that the Armada couldn't anticipate. They had to force the enemy to play by their rules rather than trying to play by the Armada's. The discussion grew quieter as the other leaders listened. Drake had already proven herself on the battlefield. Even if it was a small victory, the humans were not helpless, and they would not sit idly by while the galaxy burned. With the fall of each new world, they would fight back. They would make the Black Armada regret ever waking up. As the meeting adjourned, a sense of uneasy determination settled over the Coalition forces. They had no choice but to trust humanity and its wild tactics in this war against a threat like no other. The Black Armada was unstoppable unless the galaxy could find a way to unite in the face of this unimaginable destruction. And now it was time for the humans to show that even the smallest of fleets could stand against the darkness. The war was not going well for the galaxy's defenders. The Black Armada was relentless, its ships emerging from the depths of space faster than anyone could track their movements. Entire fleets were wiped out in the blink of an eye, leaving nothing but ash, and the memory of hopelessness behind each attack seemed more calculated than the last. It was clear that the Armada was learning quickly, adapting to the strategies used by the Coalition forces. Admiral Drake stood before a war map in the command center of the Defiant. The human cruiser had become a symbol of defiance in a galaxy on the brink of collapse. She ran her fingers over the projections of the Armada's movements, each line representing a star system falling to the unstoppable darkness. She could see it clearly now. There was no way to face the Black Armada head-on, not with the human forces still outgunned and outclassed by the alien fleets that had failed so miserably in their attempts to push back. She knew that humanity's strength lay not in firepower, but in their adaptability, their ability to think outside the box, to change the way battles were fought, to exploit weaknesses no one else saw. The human mind was a puzzle, a set of unpredictable responses and tactics that the Armada's ancient systems couldn't predict, and that was what would give them the edge. Drake turned to her crew and issued orders. They would be starting with something small, something subtle, a skirmish that could throw off the Armada's calculations and give them the upper hand in the larger picture. Their plan was simple. Humanity would strike where they weren't expected and make every battle personal. They would use the enemy's own arrogance against them. The first test came soon enough. An isolated mining colony on the edge of the Coalition's territory had been abandoned after the initial wave of attacks. The planet was left a husk, a symbol of the Armada's power, yet it still held valuable resources that the Armada would likely target. The human fleet arrived in the dead of night. Under the cover of asteroid fields, the crew of the Defiant wasn't just there to protect the colony, but to make the Armada think twice about continuing their assault. With every ship position carefully coordinated, humanity's forces attacked in a way that made no logical sense at first. They fired sporadically from multiple points, seemingly without regard for strategy. The Black Armada responded predictably, but that was the plan, to lure them into a trap, a series of false targets designed to stretch their forces thin. The Armada's fleet split into smaller segments trying to chase down the scattered human ships, only to find they had been baited into a deadly game. Once they had spread too far apart, Drake's true strike force hit them hard and fast, cutting down the flanks of the Armada's ships in a wave of firepower. No one had anticipated it wasn't the firepower of a superior fleet, but the surprise and confusion of an enemy who thought they had already won. The attack was brief but effective. The Armada was forced to retreat to regroup. Humanity had thrown them off balance, and for the first time in the war, it was the Black Armada that found itself on the defensive. The humans had given the galaxy something it hadn't seen in ages. Hope. The coalition leaders watched the footage of the battle in stunned silence, unsure of how to react to this new force that had emerged on the front lines. As the human fleet withdrew, Drake couldn't help but smile. It was only one victory, but it was the beginning of a shift in the war. The galaxy was starting to understand what it meant to fight like humans, to never give up no matter the odds, and to always find a way to turn the tables when everything seemed lost. The fleeting victory over the Black Armada's forces brought a temporary sense of hope, but Admiral Drake knew it was just the beginning. The enemy had proven itself too cunning, and a single skirmish would never turn the tide of war. Humanity's survival depended on finding something the Armada didn't expect, something that could give them the edge in a war they were still vastly outmatched in. Then something unexpected happened. It began with a faint, nearly imperceptible signal, a strange transmission buried deep within the electromagnetic noise of deep space. It wasn't the usual military chatter or distress signal from a fallen world. This was something different. The signal pulsed like a heartbeat, its source untraceable by conventional methods. After weeks of intense scanning, the Defiant picked it up, and with a sharp intake of breath, Drake knew they had stumbled upon something important. The signal was old, too old to be of immediate use, and yet it carried with it a strange resonance, as if it was beckoning them toward something. After much debate, Drake decided to follow it. If it was a trap, they would walk into it prepared. If it was a clue, then it might lead them to an advantage they didn't know they were looking for. As they journeyed into the unexplored corners of space, the signal grew clearer. It originated from a star system that had once been part of the ancient coalition of species that predated the current galaxy-wide alliances. Long forgotten, and now nothing more than a dead system, the location seemed insignificant, until they arrived at its outer rim. Hidden in the asteroid field was an ancient structure, the likes of which had never been seen before. The object was unlike anything human or alien technology could produce. Its dark surface shimmered faintly with energy that pulsed in response to their presence. A ship, or what remained of one, drifted in orbit around the mysterious structure, battered by the passage of time but still operational in some way. The remnants of the craft suggested it had once belonged to an ancient race that was now lost to the sands of time. But what truly caught their attention was the fact that the ship was human-made. Drake's mind raced as she tried to piece the puzzle together. How could this be? Humans had not ventured this far into space centuries ago, let alone built ships capable of reaching such a far-flung location. The discovery raised more questions than answers. They needed to investigate, and fast. Inside the structure, hidden within dark, vaulted chambers, the crew uncovered a treasure trove of technology. Devices, weapons, and blueprints that predated even the earliest known human spacefaring records. It was clear this was no ordinary find. Among the artifacts, they discovered schematics for a weapon, something capable of dismantling the Black Armada's ships, not through brute force, but through their very core. A weapon built to target the ancient sentient AI that controlled the Armada, the very force that made the fleet such an unstoppable entity. The weapon wasn't a simple tool of destruction. It was complex and sophisticated, a relic of an ancient intelligence whose creators had long since vanished. Drake's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the weapon's potential. This wasn't just a key to fighting the Armada. It was a key to ending the war. But with the discovery came the daunting realization that they didn't have the technology or resources to replicate it easily. They would need to figure out how to build it, how to wield it, and quickly. The feeling of being watched crept up Drake's spine. They weren't alone. The Armada's forces had begun to circle the system. A fleet of their ships was arriving, faster than expected. Without hesitation, Drake gave the order to retreat. The time for answers would come later. For now, the key to humanity's future had been found, and they had to protect it at all costs. As the Defiant powered up, Drake glanced at the schematics one last time. They had only just begun to understand what they had discovered. But now, they knew that humanity's role in this war had just shifted. The discovery of the ancient weapon sent ripples of excitement through the human fleet, but it also brought new dangers. The Black Armada had sensed the shift. It was no longer just a silent destroyer of worlds, but an intelligent force, learning from each strike, adapting to every tactic. As the humans began their journey back to the Coalition's main fleet, the presence of the Armada became undeniable. They were being hunted. Admiral Drake sat in the command center of the Defiant, eyes scanning the flickering holographic map of the galaxy. The signal they had followed, the ancient transmission, wasn't just a beacon of hope. It had been a trap, a well-laid scheme by the Black Armada to lure them into the open. Drake cursed under her breath. The Armada had anticipated their every move. The Defiant wasn't alone in the system. Behind them, dark shapes began to emerge from the void, the sleek black ships of the Armada. Dozens, then hundreds, materialized from the nebula, like shadows closing in around them. The fleet was smaller than what the humans had faced before, but it was no less deadly. These were elite forces, dispatched to stop humanity before they could weaponize the discovery. "Brace for impact," Drake ordered, her voice calm despite the rising tension. She turned to her crew. "We're not running. We'll fight them here. Use every trick we've got." The Black Armada moved with terrifying precision, a cold, calculated dance that left no room for error. Their ships descended upon the humans, launching waves of energy pulses that cut through the darkness. But humanity wasn't like the other galactic races. They fought with grit, instinct, and a deep desire to survive. The Defiant broke formation, splitting into smaller groups to confuse the Armada's sensors. While the aliens relied on overwhelming firepower and coordinated attacks, humanity's fleet relied on ingenuity. They weaved in and out of asteroid fields, using the natural terrain to shield themselves from incoming fire. The Armada's ships struggled to maintain targeting locks on the elusive humans. But even with these tactics, the human fleet was still outgunned. The battle quickly escalated. Energy shields crackled and overloaded, starships exploded in violent flares, and screams echoed through the comms as each ship was pushed to the limit. Drake's heart pounded as she watched the battle unfold, knowing that every decision she made could be the difference between victory and annihilation. The humans used their limited resources to great effect. Using experimental weapons designed to temporarily disable the Armada's energy shields, they managed to land several key hits, damaging a handful of ships. But the clock was ticking, and they had no way of holding off the entire Armada for long. As the battle raged on, a chilling realization struck Drake. They couldn't win this fight with conventional means. The weapon they had uncovered, the key to ending this war, was their only chance. But the ancient technology was incomplete. They had only a fraction of the data needed to activate it, and time was running out. "We need to retreat," Drake said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get us to the next jump point, now." But even as they prepared to make their escape, the Armada closed in. A massive flagship, the heart of the Armada's fleet, unleashed a devastating pulse of energy that struck the Defiant, sending the ship reeling into the void. The lights flickered, and the crew scrambled to maintain control, but their engines were damaged. The jump point was too far. The situation had become critical. But Drake, ever the strategist, wasn't about to give up. She turned to her second-in-command, Commander Rios. "Prepare the experimental weapons. We fight until we can't fight anymore." With a grim nod, Rios moved to carry out the order. There was no more running. This battle wasn't just about survival. It was about proving humanity's resolve. They had fought before, and they would fight again. As the Defiant systems began to spark back to life, Drake realized something crucial. The battle wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about the will to fight, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The Black Armada might have the numbers and the power, but humanity had something they hadn't counted on: the unyielding strength to never give up. The Defiant limped through space, its hull scared and its crew battered from the brutal clash with the Black Armada. They had narrowly escaped, but the victory was hollow. The Armada's relentless pursuit left little room for celebration. Admiral Drake knew that with each passing hour, the odds stacked higher against them. They had no time to lick their wounds. Time was their enemy now. The Coalition's leadership had made their way to the human fleet's location, eager to regroup and formulate a new strategy. But the more time they spent in the presence of the human forces, the more tensions began to rise. The allies who had once regarded humanity as a distraction were starting to see them as a potential threat in their own right. In hushed corridors and behind closed doors, whispers spread of human ambitions, of how the galaxy's newest players might one day demand their own seat of power, not just in the Coalition, but in the galaxy itself. Admiral Drake had seen the glances exchanged between alien leaders. She could feel the simmering distrust in the air. What had once been a fragile alliance was now a volatile mix of politics, fear, and uncertainty. If humanity didn't hold its ground now, the entire effort against the Black Armada could unravel. The stakes were too high for anything else. It was then that disaster struck. A transmission came in, encrypted and urgent. Drake had just finished a briefing when she received the message. At first, she thought it was another distress call from a distant system, but the contents were far more sinister. The message was from an unknown faction within the Coalition, one that was working in secret. The message revealed an astounding betrayal. A faction of powerful alien races, feeling threatened by humanity's growing influence, had secretly aligned themselves with the Black Armada. It was a carefully orchestrated deal. These aliens, feeling the pressure of humanity's unexpected victories and new tactics, had turned to the Armada in exchange for survival and power. Their plan was clear: destabilize the Coalition from within, weaken humanity's position, and create chaos, all while ensuring the Black Armada would have the edge in their next confrontation. The stakes of the war had shifted yet again. And now, it was not only humanity fighting against the Armada, but against some of their supposed allies as well. Drake's blood ran cold as she absorbed the information. She immediately called a meeting with her senior officers, including Commander Rios. The betrayal was massive, and the conspiracy was too deep to ignore. Rios looked equally grim as they processed the implications. "Who do we trust now?" Rios asked, his voice low. "I'm not sure we can trust anyone anymore," Drake replied, her mind racing. "But one thing is clear: this war just became a battle on two fronts." The magnitude of the betrayal wasn't lost on the human crew. They had already been fighting the most advanced force in the galaxy, but now they had to worry about sabotages and possible assassinations from their own allies. The Coalition, which had been the last hope to counter the Armada, was now divided and fractured, its very foundation shaken by greed and fear. Drake knew she had no choice. They had to expose the traitors, and quickly. But with the Black Armada closing in, they couldn't afford to waste time. The human fleet had to hold the line, fight back against their enemies both external and internal. But to do so, they would need to move fast, before the betrayal could spread further and reach the highest echelons of the Coalition. The transmission contained a list of conspirators, names Drake knew, but never thought she'd see on such a list. These were figures who had worked alongside humanity, promising unity and strength. Now, they were the very people who would doom them all. But Drake wasn't the type to sit idly by and let treachery win. "We strike first," she said, her voice hard. We expose them before they can act. We can't let the Armada, or our so-called allies, win." Rios nodded. "Let's get to work, then." Drake's mind was set. The war was no longer just a matter of survival against an overwhelming enemy. It was a fight for the very soul of the galaxy, and humanity was going to make sure that no amount of betrayal would stop them from claiming their place in the stars. Admiral Drake stood in front of the command console, her fingers trembling as she reviewed the list of conspirators. Each name was a heavy blow. A betrayal from within, where once there had been allies and promises of support. The truth hit harder than the battles with the Black Armada. Now they were fighting two wars, one for survival and the other for their place in the galaxy. The Coalition's foundation was crumbling, and humanity was caught in the center of it. The traitors had orchestrated the deal with the Black Armada well. Too well. They had used diplomacy, flattery, and coercion to bring down those they deemed a threat. The rising power of humanity. And now they were collaborating with the Armada, selling out the galaxy's hope for a future. The most frustrating part was that no one had suspected it. It had all been so meticulously planned, so hidden beneath layers of deceit. Drake closed her eyes, her mind racing with possibilities. They couldn't confront the traitors directly. Not yet. The faction within the Coalition had deep roots, powerful members, and access to critical resources. If they moved too quickly, it would expose humanity to even more danger. Instead, they would need a strategy, an infiltration to root them out, piece by piece, before the betrayal could spiral out of control. "Commander Rios," she said, her voice firm, "gather the best operatives we have. We need a covert mission. We'll find the traitors, and we'll expose them before they make their next move." Rios nodded, his face hardening with resolve. "Understood, Admiral. But how do you want to handle the rest of the Coalition? We can't just tell them. They'll see us as the threat." Drake's lips curled into a tight smile. "No, we'll play it smarter. We'll make them see it themselves. But first, we need to pull together whatever resources we can. It's time to turn the tide." As Rios left to assemble a team, Drake paced the command deck, mulling over their next steps. She knew that if they exposed the traitors too soon, it would fracture the Coalition even further. The last thing they needed was a civil war on top of everything else. Instead, they had to create doubt, slowly plant the seeds of suspicion, and let the traitors make the first mistake. Meanwhile, the Defiant was still recovering from the battle with the Black Armada. Its hull was riddled with damage, and its weapons were only partially operational. But it was still their most formidable asset in this war, and despite the turmoil within their ranks, the crew remained united. Humanity might have been fighting with its back to the wall, but that's when they were most dangerous. Days turned into weeks as the humans prepared for the next phase of their mission. The Black Armada, while seemingly relentless, had retreated into the shadows once again. They had learned to strike in waves, hit hard, retreat, then come back again when their enemies were weakest. It was a strategy that wore down even the most resilient of forces. But Drake knew it was only a matter of time before they came again. And the humans needed every advantage to stop them. The first step came when a piece of critical information arrived from one of their undercover agents within the Coalition. It was a report on a secret meeting being held by several high-ranking officials, a meeting that on the surface appeared to be an attempt to form a new alliance against the Black Armada. But Drake knew better. This was their chance. She'd send Rios and his team to intercept the meeting, gathering whatever intel they could to finally expose the conspiracy. "This is it," Drake said as she stared at the schematics. "This is how we win, one betrayal at a time." As the team prepared to execute their mission, a tense silence fell over the crew of the Defiant. They all knew the stakes had just been raised higher. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. And with every piece of this puzzle falling into place, Drake couldn't help but wonder. If the Black Armada couldn't destroy them, could betrayal from within do the job instead? The time had come. Admiral Drake stood at the command center of the Defiant, watching as the final phase of their mission unfolded before her. The traitors had made their move, but humanity had been waiting for this moment. The covert team led by Commander Rios had infiltrated the secret meeting of the Coalition conspirators. The information they had gathered was damning. Proof of the pact with the Black Armada, direct evidence of the treachery that threatened to tear apart the very foundations of the galaxy's defense. Now it was time to reveal the truth to the rest of the Coalition. Rios and his team had managed to plant tracking devices on the conspirators, feeding real-time data back to the Defiant. Drake knew that if they could disrupt the next meeting, expose the treasonous leaders before they could act, the balance of power would shift in their favor. But it wasn't just about saving face. It was about survival, about stopping the Black Armada from gaining the upper hand with a fractured coalition. As the Defiant moved into position, Drake's heart pounded in her chest. They were preparing to broadcast the incriminating evidence to the entire galaxy. But the question remained, would the rest of the galaxy believe them? Could they convince the Coalition of the truth in time? "We're in position, Admiral," Commander Rios reported from the tactical deck. His voice was steady, but Drake could sense the tension in his words. This was a pivotal moment. "The signal is locked, and we're ready to transmit." "Do it," Drake replied, her voice unwavering. The data transmission was sent. The holographic projections on the bridge flickered, displaying the intercepted communications. Images of the conspirators meeting in secret with the Black Armada's leadership, messages exchanged, deals struck. The evidence was irrefutable. Drake watched the reactions of her crew, their eyes glued to the screens as the broadcast went live across the galaxy. It was a gamble, one that could either save them or doom them. Would the Coalition's leaders turn on the traitors, or would they rally behind them, dismissing humanity's accusations as paranoia? The response came swiftly. The transmission had reached the highest echelons of the Coalition. Leaders of the various species watched, some in disbelief, others in anger. The first to react were those who had been part of the secret conspiracy, and their desperation became evident. "They're lying," one of the conspirators hissed in a private transmission, their voice laced with panic. "This isn't what it looks like. We were forced to make a deal. Earth is a threat." But it was too late. Their lies were exposed, their power base crumbling in front of the galaxy's eyes. The broadcast sparked outrage among the Coalition's leadership, especially from those who still valued their alliances with humanity. What had once been a coalition now fractured as factions began to rise against those who had betrayed them. With the evidence in the open, the remaining loyalists to humanity quickly moved to isolate and capture the traitors. Within hours, arrests were made, and the influence of the betrayers was shattered. The galaxy had a new enemy now, but it was one that wasn't faceless or all-powerful. The Black Armada might have been a force of destruction, but it was the traitors within that had caused the most harm. As the political landscape shifted, Drake turned her attention back to the Black Armada. The Armada's fleets, once so confident in their dominance, were now operating without the support of their new allies. It had weakened them, but there was still no time to waste. The humans had won the political war, but the fight against the Black Armada was far from over. Now, with the traitors neutralized, the Coalition's forces, united once again, could launch a final offensive. "We've made our stand," Drake said to her crew, her voice resolute. "Now, we finish what we started." The Defiant turned toward the black void ahead, its weapons primed. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. Humanity would not go down without a fight. The Black Armada had awakened a force it had never expected to encounter. The will of humankind was something the stars themselves couldn't predict, and humanity was just getting started.